Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you again this fine Friday night in the big town. Welcome back to the show. This is episode 248 of Let's Pod This. Thanks for being with us for this fun ride so far. This summer we've had the opportunity to visit with some of the speakers from CivicsCon, local heroes who have been either citizen activists, professional advocates. In fact, the last 2 weeks, the last two episodes, we had local citizen activist JB talking about Live Free OKC. And then last week we had Nicole Bauman from CARE Oklahoma. And what I joked is a professional advocate. That is her actual job. And we talked all about what advocacy is and what it's not and what it could be, how to reframe it so it's not just talking to elected officials. And then this week, we're going to have a third leg to that stool. I don't know how many legs are on this stool. It could be a big table, but we're going to talk about how you as a citizen can be involved in shaping policy, in how the government functions, not necessarily as a elected official, not as an elected official, and not really as a professional advocate, but as as an expert, as a concerned citizen, as someone who is willing to raise their hand and say, I will serve on as an appointed member of a board or commission or whatever they might call those, right? Citizen councils, I think. And my guest for this conversation is my dear friend, Constanzia Nizza. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's really good to see you. I felt like several years ago, we used to run into each other at the Capitol fairly regularly. And that was when you were working for, let's see, did you work for OICA?
I did not.
No?
I was working at DHS.
It was at DHS?
Yes.
Something with children.
Yes.
Okay.
Working in child welfare.
And you volunteered with the Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy for years and years, right?
And continue to. They have a special place in my heart.
That's right. I saw photos of you at the Heroes Ball recently. Well, now you are, you left DHS and now you are Chief of Staff for the Oklahoma Juvenile Authority. Is that what it's called?
The Office of Juvenile Affairs.
Oh, Office of Juvenile Affairs.
All of the letters were there. You had it.
It really, it's a fun game to just take acronyms from government and guess what they stand for.
Agreed.
Okay, well, I butchered that one.
No, you're doing great.
Is there an Oklahoma Juvenile Authority? Did I make that up?
If there is one, I don't know.
I'm probably thinking, I just read an article about the Access Turnpike situation with OTA, which is the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority.
Right.
Okay, I probably conflated those two. Excuse me. Office of Juvenile Affairs. And you've been there for how long?
2 years. I just hit my 2-year anniversary, actually.
All right. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's a big deal. And so, your role there, you're a paid employee. This is not an appointed position.
Correct.
Right. But I know you're also very involved with the kind of young professional network, especially here in Oklahoma City, although I know they have a kind of a statewide consortia where people, tag team on events and stuff. And so you are often, I just kind of see you popping in and out in your official capacity, but also as someone who I think generally wants to make the state better and is like an interface with the public and your peers to say, hey, y'all, let's get involved. And so today we're going to talk about one of the probably little known or underappreciated ways to be involved, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm going to kind of let you talk for a minute and tell us why this is important and how you came to even be aware of all of this.
Absolutely. So as you said, I'm an employee of the state, right? So I'm one of the people who raised my hand and said, I want to work for the government, as my job forever. Then there are other people who say, oh, I want to get involved, and they run for office. That's a huge lift. And then there are certainly the people who say, I want to get involved, and they are being paid by certain groups to push forward certain agendas. There's this missing group of people who have a job that they love and do really well. They just also happen to care about something that's going on in government, and they would like to contribute to that, but that's not what they want to spend their whole lives doing. Totally understand that. But I just don't find that most people know that they can do that that's even an option. And so one of the ways that you can get involved is to be appointed to a board or commission. Oklahoma has a long history of trying to decentralize power. We're not real fond of one human being the gatekeeper.
Right. We're a little skeptical.
We are. We have, for example, we elect our labor commissioner in Oklahoma. That is a department head, right? She leads the Department of Labor. In most states, that would just be somebody who applied and got hired in a very normal department head sort of way. But here in Oklahoma, especially at the time in which we were founded, labor was a big deal, and we didn't want just anybody being able to hire that person. We all wanted a say in it, and so it's an elected position.
Yeah, and if I could interject,
Please.
There's a book, and I'll link to this in the show notes, but it's just called like A History of Oklahoma Politics. It's very straightforward, and it's, if you have any interest in this, my fellow nerds, it is very good. It is very informative, and literally the first chapter, when they are starting to talk about how statehood came about and kind of the weird coalitions and how that first framers happened, it all happened somewhat suddenly, right? Where there was some kind of power struggles and takeover. And when it came to writing the state constitution, you are exactly right. There's a ethos that said, we want to vest as much power as we can in the hands of the people. And so even for many state agencies might have a leader, and that person might even be elected, but then the agency would actually be governed by a board. So not just one person, but 9 or 7 or 9 or 15 or something, so that it was that power was decentralized even within an agency. And it is very clear that that was a core ethos, an intent of the framers to say, we don't want to be taken over by ideologues. We don't. And at the time, we don't want to be beholden to corporations. That was the big thing. There was a lot of conversation about how can we ensure that corporations won't take over our state, which is just fascinating history. So
no, I love it. I know you said, "Oh, my fellow nerds." I'm like, that's me. I'm a fellow nerd. Because that intention to make sure that there was some effort of balance, you see that in Oklahoma government all over the place, right? We have an elected superintendent of public instruction. You also have an appointed secretary of education. So again, we all raised our hands and picked somebody, and then there was this other person who was directly appointed by the governor. Now, I will say the caveat to the cabinet is while the governor gets to appoint those people, they still have to go to the Senate and get them to say yes.
Right.
So there's that sort of asterisk on the concentrated power. So there's also this other step of trying to keep check on that person.
Well, and that's similar to what happens at the federal level, right?
Absolutely.
We hear, the president has to appoint something like 4,000 positions. It's an enormous
so
amount.
Many.
And obviously it's not like the president themselves sitting down with a bunch of resumes. Oh my God, that sounds so overwhelming. Just being like, this person doesn't have a good cover letter. I'm not going to. No, but their team, right, helps with that. And many of those appointments have to go through the U.S. Senate. Likewise here at the state, a lot of them have to go through the Senate. But there are also some positions that are appointed by the pro tem of the Senate or the Speaker of the House, right? Especially for some statewide boards.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, there's a high volume of positions that have to be appointed. That's true for the feds. That's true for us here in Oklahoma. I would just say here at the end of July, I went and looked, and the governor made 30 appointments in the month of July. That's almost one every single day of the month.
Wow.
30 in the month of July. And only 2 of them needed the Senate to confirm. It was the Cabinet Secretary for Human Services and the new Cabinet Secretary for Workforce. That's it. The other 28 of them, they've been appointed. Those people are now in those jobs doing that work, meeting and contributing. But as you said, it's not just the governor who has all these appointments to make. By statute, there's a lot of places where the Speaker of the House or the pro tem also has to appoint people. And so I think OJA's board is a good example of that. So we have a 9-member board. 5 of them come from the governor. But then there's another 2 that come from the Speaker and 2 that come from the pro tem. If they don't know, anyone that is interested in that, then those positions just go vacant. And
Really?
right. I mean, for several months, actually, of my 2 years that I was at OJ, we had a bit of a vacancy and had to actively go out and find people who would be interested in doing this. Because as we said at the beginning, these are positions where people who serve on boards and commissions do not do this full time. They're not getting paid to do that. They get some reimbursement for travel and that sort of thing. But by and large, they have other professional work that they're doing. This is just in addition to all of that. And so to find people who are interested and willing can sometimes be difficult. And so what I would hope is that the more that people realize that this is available to them, they recognize, oh, I'm interested and I'm willing, and they raise their hands. So the barrier to entry when it comes to boards and commissions is so low. It really can be as simple as emailing the pro tem's office and saying, I would like to do this.
So you've got to know that the position exists.
You do.
But you can, the application process is maybe not as formal as people might think.
Correct. So, for example, if you were to go and look at the Oklahoma ABC book, which is presented by the Department of Libraries every year, it is the comprehensive guide to every agency, board, and commission in Oklahoma.
Oh.
It's 134 pages long, and it's very small print because there's so many. But if you were to find something that you were interested in, you really could just, either email the pro tem or the speaker or your local official that you may have a really great relationship with. Let them know, hey, representative, I'm really interested in that. And your representative would go in and talk to the speaker for you. I will say for the governor appointments, if you go to the governor's website, and there's a tab for appointments, and it literally says, apply here. You click on it, you fill it in, they'll call you, and it says like 2 weeks or something if there's something.
Do you have to choose the one, or can you?
You do. You have to say sort of what you're interested in and maybe what your background is, but you just click on it's 2 clicks.
Right. That's
so
fascinating.
Easy.
So I formerly used to serve on the state board of suicide prevention. My position on the board was a gubernatorial appointment. There were some other positions that were appointed, I think, by the speaker and the pro tem, and as well as some others. And I'm trying to remember even how I found out about it. I served on some other kind of state planning bodies that were more directly related to my work in the HIV community. But I think, as listeners might remember, and you might know this too, like I'm a licensed professional counselor, and so always kind of that is always a part of me. I'm always kind of, I don't dabble, but like I'm always involved in that community. And I had found out about it through, I think, a colleague that was stepping down, and they said, you should apply. And so I did, and my application took months. Like I just started going to meetings, but I couldn't vote or anything, which was fine. We didn't have a lot to vote on, but we just kind of had to wait, right? So I think I kind of applied through that board. They helped facilitate it to the governor's office, and then it just goes on their desk. And this is right towards the end of Governor Fallon's tenure. This might have been 2018, might have been her last year, in fact. And so there was this like expectation that like, well, everything that's been kind of sitting on the back burner is now she's going to get it taken care of before she leaves office. And that's what happened. Somewhere in there, I got a letter and said, congrats, you've been appointed. But there was not like, I didn't sit down with Governor Fallon and interview for it. She doesn't know me from Adam. But that's how I got on that. And it was an opportunity for me to try to help shape state policy, not laws, but like our policy, right? And how we addressed suicide prevention in our state, which was very meaningful. It was a wonderful opportunity. It was not paid. There's no money there. This was a volunteer thing. But I thought it was cool that could even happen. Absolutely. And the board that you were on, were there other counselors as well, or sort of what was the background of the folks that you were with? Yeah. So on and I think since then that this commission has been, or council has been disbanded or sunsetted or something. But so there were some mental health professionals. A couple of us were like licensed counselors. There's a couple of folks that represented tribal entities. A couple of folks who are people with lived experience. Like one was a mother whose son died by suicide. And there was someone from the State Department of Mental Health. I think someone from the State Department of Health, someone from the medical community. So it was, it was structured to be representative of the constituencies that probably should have a seat at that table, right, to help kind of shape policy. There was no elected officials. There wasn't like any big name people kind of thing. It was just honestly like good-hearted folks who did this because it was part of their job for a couple of them, or for most of us, something we cared about. But it was, we met once a month. It wasn't for like 3 hours. It wasn't a huge amount of time, but I thought it was worthwhile.
Absolutely. And that diversity that you were describing is typically sort of baked into whatever the parameters of the board or commission is. So maybe there is some sort of professional credential that they're looking for. They may be looking for counselors. They may be looking for someone from the medical community just so that they can bring that perspective. But there are lots of boards and commissions that really will just say someone with lived experience with the criminal justice system, right, or human services, sort of fill in the blank. They want people to be able to speak into that. And outside of that, there's usually some minimal qualifications. You have to live in Oklahoma. That's usually a big one. You have to be eligible to vote, those sort of like basic things. But otherwise, it really is diverse. I will say in my experience, one of the things that they try to pay special attention to is to have diversity geographically.
Yeah.
So, the Capitol sits right in the middle of Oklahoma City. And as you said, maybe you just heard from a colleague that there was an opening. That's the way a lot of people hear about it. So if you're not in Oklahoma City meeting all these people, you might be less likely to know. And so there's been a much stronger intention to reach out to different places in Oklahoma. The rural communities are going to look different and should be speaking into those conversations. But also, what is sort of the urban experience in Oklahoma City looks different than Lawton or Tulsa. And so all of that to say, for folks who are from different places, that's an asset for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Aside from geographic and professional diversity, I know many of them might strive to be more diverse or representative in terms of race, gender, those kinds of things. What about age? Like, do you know of any boards or commissions that like younger folks, like teenagers, could serve on?
So there's not any boards that I know of that have sort of specific guidance to find someone who's younger. But I will say there's also not a single board I know of that has a minimum age to be appointed.
Oh.
One would argue that if you have to be eligible to vote, then you have to be 18. So maybe that's like baked into it. But otherwise, there's not any other mention of the age requirement.
Right.
And actually, on the most recent Child Welfare Task Force that the governor appointed, we had a dear friend of ours who's right at 24 who was appointed. He had lived experience and was appointed. So it could be, sort of the gamut when it comes to age.
Yeah, I mean, some things, like I was wondering specifically about like OJA, since you are focused on juveniles, right? Like there's, I wondered if there some of those have like, it's similar to how like many health entities have like patient advocates or a client advisory board, and you want people who are recipients or consumers of your program or your services. And sometimes that's kids, right? Like you want to have some input of like, does this make sense? Now, I mean, we all know there's a big difference between asking like a 7-year-old and a 17-year-old, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't ask, right? And at least sometimes they surprise you. Kids say the darndest things.
I don't know that I've had a conversation with a kiddo where I wasn't kind of surprised by the insight they had. We do have, for example, the statewide advisory group that is a board within OJA. They have listening sessions with our kiddos who are in custody.
Okay.
And so there is youth voice sort of in that way, but not maybe at the table. I'm using air quotes, not that anyone can see them.
Yeah.
But
it's implied. They get it.
Thank you.
We have very smart listeners.
Yes.
They can see through the radio. The fact that I said radio like indicates my age in this. Hello, fellow children. Well, cool. So do you know how many boards and commissions and stuff there are in the state? So 134 pages worth.
Right. I wish that I had the exact number. That is going to be my new fun fact. I'm gonna figure it out, and then I will know.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm sure the Department of Libraries knows, but I can't seem to find it off the top of my
Right. That's fascinating.
Google.
Well, and so I will link to the ABC book in the show notes. I had no idea this even existed, and I'm kind of scrolling through it now, and it has all of the statewide elected officials, including like the Corporation Commission and things people forget about. It has the governor's cabinet as of whenever this was published at the end of 2022, and like their bios about all of them. Oh, this is a tremendous resource.
Absolutely.
And then it goes into the legislature as well, and then the judicial branch, and about all the Supreme Court, the Court of Criminal Appeals, and then, golly, we could go down the judiciary for a long time. There's a lot of folks. The 10th Circuit, judges of the Workers' Compensation Court of Existing Claims. Okay, we're getting deep in the weeds. All the DAs, finally, here on page 55, it says agencies, boards, and commissions. And it just tells you about all of them, right? It doesn't list who the members are, which would be tough because that
changes
all the time. And this is very clearly a PDF, not a website.
No.
But yeah, the Arts Council, the Archaeological Survey. I'm just going to name a few that look fun. The Broadband Office, which has been in the news quite a bit lately. The Medical Examiner's Office. If you go back to the early days of our podcast, we had several episodes about the debacle over there. The Commission on Children and Youth. A fascinating story about how that came about. The Department of Commerce, the Conservation Commission. I'm only in the C's. Let me zip down. What else do we have? Hey, look, there's OJA, Office of Juvenile Affairs. Department of Labor, the Commissioners of the Land Office, something that's also been in the news recently. And it has information about each one. The Lottery Commission. Oh, that would be rad. I just bought a Mega Millions ticket on my way here today, hoping I can win the $1.5 billion or whatever crazy amount it is.
I thought you were saying, I want to serve on that. You're like, I'd like to win the lottery. Like,
well,
yes, me
both.
too.
I would definitely, I don't think you get a discount on tickets. But I do think, I don't know, I find from a mental health perspective and like addiction perspective and from a fiscal perspective, I find the lottery fascinating for lots of reasons. When I was getting my MBA, that was kind of one of my like, it wasn't like a paper, but there was some kind of like case study that I went into about, do lotteries benefit states the way that we say they're going to? And if you go back for Oklahoma, this is a bit of a sidebar, clearly. If you go back to the early 2000s, right, when Oklahoma was proposing a lottery, and if you pull the news stories from when it was, because it had to go before a vote of the people, right? And I think Governor Henry was in office. I may be wrong about that. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, if you go back and read news stories in a chronological order that year, the amount of money that the elected officials say the lottery will generate for education, no, it goes up every time. They kept sweetening the deal. They're like, it's going to generate 100 million. It's going to generate 150 million. And then up, it's like 300 million. And it keeps going up, which is why, I mean, it makes sense. Like, these are all projections and we don't know, but it could do a lot.
They were speaking it into existence.
Yes. And they were trying to get it passed, right? And it passed overwhelmingly anyway. So it wasn't a big lift. But then, especially in the first few years, it generated less than people thought it was or expected. And I was like, well, that's probably because they expected what you said in November and not what you said in January before that, which was a more reasonable amount. So anyway, for many reasons.
The importance of managing expectations in politics.
Right. Yeah. And so if you, if someone listening is certainly someone who's like a licensed professional or credentialed professional, therapists, doctors, nurses. I mean, I just saw a thing about the Board of Examiners for podiatry. There's a lot of things out there that there's almost certainly you're governed by some kind of board, right? Like there's the State Board of Behavioral Health Licensure that LPCs fall under.
Right.
But there's a lot of other stuff. I mean, from the Route 66 Commission. Oh, I'm going to read this weekend.
You have some weekend reading. And the people who are serving on those boards and commissions, in terms of sort of what are they doing, they're reviewing proposed policy. They're suggesting changes to policy. By statute, our board at OJA is actually the rulemaking body for our agency. And so the role is critical, right? Because if you have somebody who either doesn't care, is sort of checked out, or is just not there because there's vacancies, then that thing that we believe in terms of having all of these voices isn't going to work in terms of speaking to what we should be doing or how we should be changing things.
Yeah. Well, and so far my takeaways from this, Constanzia, is that there are literally hundreds of boards and commissions on which people could serve if they knew about them.
Correct.
And many of those positions go unfilled already.
Correct.
So you may not even be having to like beat out somebody else that's
Exactly.
highly qualified. We joke about the number of legislators that are elected by default because no one files against them. And so
Same.
there was not a mandate that you win, that just you won by default. And in some cases, listeners, you could win by default here and serve on some of these commissions. You would learn a lot about the state, likely something that no one else in your circle knows much about. And so you are automatically a subject matter expert. And you have the opportunity to make a big difference in how our state grows and develops in key ways.
Absolutely. Getting involved is sort of the core of that sustainable people power that you talk about. This is it.
That's fascinating. And we should say, this isn't just at the state level.
Correct. It's certainly in Oklahoma City, it's very similar. Hundreds. I don't know exactly how many.
I think there's a little over 500. I don't know if it's
So
boards
many.
or 500 positions in the city of Oklahoma City that are appointed. Most of those are appointed by the mayor or a member of the city council. And in fact, just this week, the city of Oklahoma City, I saw Mayor Holt tweet about this, that they have aggregated all the information into one place. It was all available before, who serves on all of these, but they just put all it in one big list on the website. And so a friend of mine, Merrick Cornett, serves on the Traffic Commission, I think, right? And she was someone who, she's obviously somewhat connected because her father-in-law is former mayor, but she's someone who I know cares about transportation in our city of all kinds.
Sure.
Cars, trucks, things that go, buses, bicycles, all this. And for the city, there's a master application where you apply, and I think you can select the ones that you want to be considered for. And I filled this out a few years ago. I probably should go back and do it again. But I was overwhelmed at the number of possibilities where I was I just want a select all. But, some of these maybe aren't a good fit. But
sure. Be careful what you ask for, though.
Right, yeah. But also it's cool that government at any level, especially here in Oklahoma, is actively soliciting input directly from citizens.
Absolutely. All the time.
Right.
Right. So people in their minds, I think they picture voicing their opinions as voting. So it happens in this very regular period, and you do it on this day, and then that's it. And you sort of go away and do your own thing. And the truth is, you could be contributing all the time. Right. And we've certainly had more activism and advocacy in Oklahoma, I feel like, more recently than we have historically. But there are other ways to passionately participate that don't look like activism or paid advocacy.
Yeah. Well, and, I think a lot of people know that they can serve on a nonprofit board about an issue they care about, right? Let's Fix This is a nonprofit that's governed by a board of directors from people who care about civic engagement and, moving the state forward with good policy. And, we just added a couple of members to the board this year that we had known were actively supporting. They'd been volunteers, they've been donating, and had kind of been in our orbit already. And so there was a formal kind of application process they went through. And it's similar, right? Then with the government, it's your opportunity to serve on a board kind of like serving on a nonprofit board, but you don't even have to raise money, right? There's
That's the best part,
there's
right?
not a gala like you can, but you can actually have a big impact on the policy that governs our state.
And if you don't show up, right, then over time things will evolve. So there are some boards and commissions that used to exist that don't anymore. And that has an impact. Now, I'm not saying that one is necessarily right or wrong, but for example, DHS is a huge agency, has 6,000 employees in the entire state. They used to be governed by a commission. They aren't any longer, right? Now they have a governor-appointed director who has to be confirmed by the Senate, but that is their oversight. So no longer do you have this, membership of 9 people from across the state who are keeping eyes on them. Certainly, the public is keeping eyes on them and voicing opinions when they have them, but that formality has gone away. And similarly, OMES, the Office of Management and Enterprise Services, huge agency that impacts all kinds of operations in the state, does not have a board or commission that's keeping eyes on it. So I would hope that people recognize that it's such a privilege to have it, and we have to keep engaging with it, because what if it doesn't exist if you're not there?
That's a really good point. In fact, I work with some folks nationally that are pushing for an increase in investment in, we'll say, like the civil service, right? Like in the infrastructure that helps our government run, and it's stuff like this. In fact, there's a professor at Harvard that's in like mathematics, computer science, or something, but he has an interest in this is next level nerd.
I love it.
So
Bring it
knows.
on.
He has an interest in sortition, and sortition is like the study of, or the ability to like sort people into. And by a certain algorithm. I'm kind of butchering it, but the gist of it, right? And his whole thing is citizen assemblies. And so there's a movement, or at least some advocates, who are pushing for an increased usage of citizen assemblies. And these are often bigger than just a board or commission, right? So a board or commission might have 9 or 15 or maybe 30 people who are like kind of representative of the state or constituency. But there's a few places that are using citizen assemblies that are maybe, 250 people. So with a bigger sample size, you have an ability to make it more representative.
Okay.
But if you just base it on who applies, the applicants are going to self-select, so it's not going to be representative. So you have to like take a non-representative population, and then from that pull out a group that is representative of the broader state. Like it's just a math problem.
I love it.
With a little bit of value judgment in there on how you weight things. Anyway, he's created like an online tool. It's called Panelot, because you're selecting a panel of people. You can go to panelot.org. It's fascinating if you like math, and like playing around with these kinds of things. But I've started mentioning this to some of, to my city council member and a couple of others, of like, hey, well, what if each ward had a group of citizens that were like an advisory council to you as a city council member? And their response was like, we've got like a boatload of boards and commissions that are, and I was like, okay, that's fair.
Right. They were like, please no more.
and so when I've talked to folks nationally, this is not necessarily the case everywhere, right? Like not everywhere has as many or as accessible as it is here, which is an unexpected and welcome surprise about Oklahoma.
That we are leading the country in this way. Good job, us.
It is fun. I mean, government is fascinating at all levels. Like the Chicago City Council has like a couple of dozen city council members. I want to say like almost 50 or something. They have a lot.
That's a lot.
I think it's Chicago. Maybe it's LA. One of those big cities has a lot of city council members. And, in discussions here of like, should we expand the Oklahoma City Council because it's a spread out city? This comes up of like, well, how many is too many? Like, that's too many. But if we've got this, if we got 9, like, where's the balance of enough to be representative without it being ungovernable, I guess? So
no, absolutely.
Okay, now we're way off topic.
I know. I'm sorry. I was about to say more about city government because I also love it. But because each city councilman represents 90,000 people, which is more than your state senator.
Right.
They have a lot of people that they have to speak for. And we think that's too many for a state senator, but not too many for a city council person.
Right. Well, we is a bit of a blanket term there. But it really, I mean, this is a whole different, I mean, the state of New Hampshire, right? Like their legislature has, their House of Representatives has like 400 members. There's some statistic, like everybody, like they represent just a couple of thousand people. Like because it's not a very populous state. It's not,
right.
It's about, I think it's around what Oklahoma is. But they have so many, and you can serve in the legislature and the school board at the same time, and you can be a poll worker.
You have to when you don't have any people.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's like 1 out of every 11 New Hampshireites have served like in the legislature. Like it's some crazy number, which makes this like supports a lot of my like preconceived notions about New Hampshire and politics. And I think helps explain a little bit why we still view the New Hampshire primary as like an important one, even though the state is by no means representative of America or the population of America. But when you see this, it's because the citizens there are disproportionately engaged. And so it's like a way to tell us more about what people are thinking about some of these candidates. Anyway, I guess if you want to run for office, you should move to New Hampshire. If you just want to serve on our board or commission,
you should live right here in Oklahoma. Yeah,
that's great. I'm sure at this point, Constanzia listeners are wondering if you yourself serve on any boards or commissions, and are you even eligible to, since you're a state employee as well? That's probably a slippery slope, huh?
No, as you sort of mentioned earlier, on some of the boards and commissions, there are appointments by agency. So an agency representative has to be on certain boards and commissions in addition to the fabulous folks who raise their hand to be there voluntarily. And so being at the Office of Juvenile Affairs, I do serve on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Board.
Oh, sure.
By nature, representing the agency itself.
Yeah. I have a friend that serves on the Child Death Review Board.
Yes.
These are important boards.
They are. They're heavy.
Yeah.
So if it's something you have an interest in, there are some people who have to be there, and then there are other people who volunteer, and God bless those people.
Yeah. But for both of those things, right? Those are heavy topics. And from what I know, right? Like there's reviewing of these incidents.
Correct.
But also, when you review that many incidents, you learn the details surrounding those incidents, it in turn like informs you about policy too, right? Like, I don't know, like
no, absolutely.
I would think for like the Child Death Review Board, the thing I think of most is drownings, right? And like, what are our building codes, municipal codes, state laws around children and swimming pools? Like there's some governance that happens there that you, with a much larger sample size than I'm aware of, like you have more information to say, oh, we should take this to somebody because like, here's what the data says and we're in it every month. So I think that kind of stuff is immensely important.
And it has such an immediate, tangible outcome. So Domestic Violence Fatality Review Board, they have, for example, in the past, one of their policy recommendations was to have a lethality assessment that has to be conducted every time law enforcement responds to a domestic violence call. That lethality assessment is 9 questions, very quick, just make a determination and then move on. And what you find, so that happened 6 years ago, and what you found in that 6 years is when you're doing these reviews, whether or not it was done, and I have yet to see one in which it was done. Oh. Which then further reinforces that this is something that needs to happen every time, and this is the outcome that we see when it's not.
Right.
And so anyway, you can see sort of what happens when you make policy, and when it's not followed, obviously some bad things can happen, but you can contribute to those sorts of conversations and just know that in the instances where that is happening sort of as it should, there's intervention and someone's life is better.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Very interesting. Constanzia, we've covered a lot of ground on this. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet?
A few side quests along the way, I feel like.
Yes. Well, the sortition dialogue was Quite something. Well, is there anything we haven't covered about this that you think is important for listeners to know?
So I would say this, that there are going to be appointments in the state that are very high profile. And
like the State Board of Education.
Right. And so I would just want people to sort of know that there are maybe less high profile, less sexy opportunities, and those are vast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So don't think that there's these two that are always in the news, or that it has to be a cabinet secretary level position, that there are all of these other options, because I think we sometimes just see things coming through our feeds and think, well, that's it. There's so much more. And so if you have a desire to serve, there's an opportunity for you.
Yeah. And I will say, like, partisanship doesn't play a part in most of these, right? Like, it's probably not even allowed to be. Yeah. It's not a question. You don't have to necessarily know somebody to have an insider access. And what's interesting too, like, I know in the Senate, when they confirm these, usually it's your hometown senator is who presents it, right? So if you live in, Senator Julia Kurt's district, like me, like, she would present me. But if you were in Norman or Gotebo or wherever, like, your senator kind of by custom is the one that presents you, even though, like, you're quote, like, appointed by
the pro tem
or the governor or whomever, but they, you get presented by the person that's closest to you, and you don't have to even know them to, like, apply, right? Like,
no.
Again, like, I didn't know Governor Fallon, right? I applied and got appointed by her. She and I disagree on a number of policy issues. But we agreed about the importance of suicide prevention. So,
right.
Those things that's part about living in society, right? That is, like, a little affirming sometimes, to be like, we disagree on lots of stuff. On this, we can agree. And so we're going to work together on this.
Correct.
And I'm just not going to talk to you about the other thing for right now.
That's right. Not today, but
right.
Tomorrow I'll call you.
Well, it's a great way to build a relationship, right?
The relationships are, I think, probably the biggest benefit, right? Getting to actually see and know the other people, because all of these that I'm aware of are meeting in a place somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing other humans and talking through usually some pretty serious topics.
Yeah. Well,
that matter.
And it changes things, right? Like, you become a decision maker for the public in some ways, right? Like, you're not the chief executive. You can't issue executive orders. You
can't hire and fire people.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But you can provide guidance that's important.
Exactly.
And, on the occasion something rises up, and even if you're calling your elected official, your city council person, your state rep, whatever, but to say, hey, I'm calling about this, and not only do I care about it, but, like, I serve on this board or commission.
Absolutely.
So I'm not, I am an average Joe, but not just any average Joe. Like, I'm an average Joe on a board. And so that
gives some credibility. You have access to information. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay. So everyone now is going to go and sign up for board or commission.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so go.
That's what's going to happen.
Go into the show notes. I'll make a blog post about this too, because I think this is really interesting. But go through the ABC book on of Oklahoma City. I'll make a list of that as well. I'm sure Tulsa has something similar, and I know most of our listeners live in one of those. But if you don't, I'm not going to Google every town in America. So just go to your city's website and see, or ask your city council member. Send them an email and say, hey, I'd like to be more involved. Are there any boards or commissions you need somebody? And what are they? And I'll let you know if I'm interested, right? Like, if it's like, wastewater or something, like, maybe that's not for me, but for somebody else, maybe it totally is.
Absolutely.
I don't know your life. All right, great. Constanzia, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for letting me come and nerd out with you.
Oh, anytime.
Usually no one cares about this sort of thing. So to talk to you and other people who care makes my heart happy.
Great. Well, we'll have to have you come back and do a recap of your presentation from CivicsCon, which was about, it was really about being involved, right? It was about
voter engagement, specifically for younger folks, so under 35.
Yeah.
There's been a ton of research.
Yes.
So it's got to be better.
If I have a colleague that said America will be in a much better position if the kids can grow up faster. Like, and I was like, okay, I know what you're saying. You just mean if they would vote at a level proportionate to their percentage of society. Anywho, there's been a lot of math talk in this episode. We're very grateful for Constanzia being here. Listeners, we're very grateful for you being here as well. As we said several times, please find ways to get involved. As we say every episode, decisions are made by those who show up. And today, you learned about a new way you can show up. All right, we'll be back next week with some more news and excitement about Oklahoma politics and government. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good week.